All right, so it's time for a real basic primer on music theory. It's very difficult to do a basic primer on music theory, and in reality, this is more of a what notes should I choose, or what sort of clusters of notes should I choose if I'm going to try to make a piece of music that's genre based, that's going to make sense with the music that most people are listening to. Now, on the website, we're going to do a number of different series, articles, going through books together where we dig really deep into music theory. But for now, I can't do that because of time constraints, and I don't want to go blabbering on for 2 hours in this video. So I'm just going to run through things really, really fast, and you're just going to have to kind of take my word for it at this point. I'm going to give you very watered down reasoning, and at the end, I'm going to come to a conclusion that actually some of you will probably already anticipate from the beginning. However, I do want you to listen through to the end because I am going to debunk a rather popular myth that's out there about working in this particular key. So we'll get into all of those sorts of things here in this video. So the great tool that's always used when you take like an introduction to music theory course is the piano keyboard. And the reason is it's such a great visual tool of how we've decided to split up the octave. And the octave is what's really important in all musical cultures. And throughout history, pretty much any civilization or culture that's had music has discovered the octave on their own. And you always can think of that, sort of classic example of Pythagoras and his crew out there with a 5-meter long string and a 10-meter long string and plucking them and going, oh my gosh, eureka, we've discovered the octave. That's not exactly how that went down, but basically every culture has been able to come to that same sort of conclusion. It's nothing that's that crazy to wrap your head around. So let's do the sort of sonic listening first, because a lot of music theory is already ingrained in you just by being a human being and just by listening to so much music that I don't really even have to explain the why and the how we came to these conclusions, because you already know it. You just don't really have the words to express it. So if I play a couple of notes here, in fact, let's go down an octave because this is going to be too annoying. But if I play a couple of notes, you can distinctly hear those two different pitches or those two notes, right? If I go, you can hear those two together and you can kind of separate them out. When you get to the octave, which is just going and finding, for example, like if we were on D, the next spot where a white note is in between two black notes, and then there's, more white notes on either side, we'd go up to here, obviously, right? So that's how you determine the octave. So for C, if I play these two notes together, it becomes virtually impossible to really pull out both of those pitches, or you might be able to pull out both those pitches, but they distinctly sound like the same note. So just listen to this example here. If I play this, I play this, then I play this. And in this case, because we're using a synthesizer and we're using just basic waveforms, you can actually hear it locking into place. And later on the website and in articles, we'll actually look at that and you'll see how it literally locks in perfectly. And that's how you can kind of determine how harmonious an interval is going to be by how complicated or not complicated a waveform is. So that's all interesting stuff to get ready for. But from a technical perspective, what does this mean? All it means is that if we have an A4 and it's tuned to 440, the the A5 is going to be at 880 hertz, aka a perfect 2-to-1 ratio, the second simplest ratio after a 1-to-1. So what that really means is that the simpler the ratio, the more consonant, the more in tune, the more harmonious something is going to sound, and the more complex the ratio, typically the more dissonant something is going to sound to our ears. So it really is rooted in a physical phenomena more than anything else. And if you remember how, sound itself, it literally is like waves through the air, and those waves combining. If you have two waves that have a distinct and clear proportional relationship to one another, they're going to sound more harmonious because of how they're balancing out in the air. So you can always kind of pull this stuff back to physics if you really want to go there, which I know many of you don't. But anyway, once you've discovered the octave, if let's say we're our own civilization, the next natural thing we'd want to do is split that octave up. So if we had a 5-meter string and a 10-meter string and we're going, oh, wow, that sounds as if it's the exact same note, the next thing we'd want to do is try a 6-meter string and listen to how that sounds in relationship. And that's really the basis of breaking up your octave. And you could break it up as many ways as you want, right? Because if we have 440 and 880, we could, in theory, break that up into 1,000 different numbers. We could go 440.1, 440.2, 440.3. Now, 1,000 is way too much, and even like 20 or 30 is way too much. But different cultures have decided on different ways to break up that octave. Here in the West, after many years of development and looking at our piano keyboard here, you can tell that we've broken it up into 12. But why do we typically not use 12 when we're making music? You're not probably going to be, going through and playing all of these notes in succession. And the reason is this is a kind of a watered down version. From our short-term memory perspective, 12 is way too many. We can't focus on 12 different things. We're going to get confused. We'll play one really crazy chord and then play something else. And to our ear, it's going to sound as if those are not related in any kind of way. There have been many composers that have written, 12-tone music. And some of that music is really interesting because it kind of jars you and makes you feel uncomfortable. But for the most part, with pop music and even music back in the day, for the church, it wasn't meant to be super jarring or confusing or to put you off guard. It was meant to have a purpose, to sound usually quite beautiful, or with pop music to be something that's very addictive, that you can easily remember, a tune, so to speak. So if we just listen to all 12 of these played back to back, and that's just playing them straight up and down. Imagine if you started to combine these to create chords and then you have melodies on top of that. It would be a lot. And that's why when you listen to like 12-tone music, it can be quite a jolt to your system. But for me, it's quite interesting. But, it's not going to be winning Grammys anytime soon. In the East and in the Orient for the most part, and in other cultures as well, what they did is they actually took that octave, like let's say it's that 440 to 880, and they broke that up into 5 different notes, okay? And what you have in front of you here is what's referred to as the major pentatonic scale, which we're starting on C because we can use all white notes, but in reality, what we also could do is just use all these black notes. And all any of these different scales are, or keys are, pitch collections, they're just patterns. Okay, so with the black notes, we have like a full step because we're starting here on a black note. We go to a white note up to a black note. That's a full step. And then from this black note up to this black note, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, a step and a half, a step, and that's 5. And then to get back around, we're actually going to call this a 1, and we have a step and a half. And you can see that relationship here as well. So you'll listen to this, it will have kind of an Asian flair to it. And then I've added just a basic little chord progression afterwards. Like so. And if you wanted, you could make your song in like a C major pentatonic. The only problem is you don't have access to all of the white notes. So if you were going to work with a pentatonic scale, I'd recommend using all of the black notes, okay? And rooting that down here at this C sharp or D flat, okay? So that's what you'd kind of want to start with. That's kind of what you'd want to end with because it keeps that pattern alive, that pattern that we see here if we were to start with C. So why don't we just use a pentatonic scale? The reason has to do more with variety, and it also has to do with our short-term memory. So 5 is great, and there's a lot of options for 5. But as human beings, we've actually found that 7 is the maximum number of basically things that we can remember from a short-term perspective. And so we want to make our music as kind of complicated and compelling and interesting as possible without it being too much. So it's kind of a case of like, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. 5 is maybe a little too little, 12 is maybe a lot too much, but 7, yeah, that's just right. So there's other reasons why we came to 7, but basically, from that perspective, if it makes sense, that can give you a reason as to why we have 7 notes in the traditional Western modes and scales. And so I'm sure you're all familiar with C major, and much like we had that C major pentatonic, C major is, again, it's just another pattern. We have a step, a step, a half step, a step, a step, a step, and then a half step, and we're back to where we began. And so you could take this and you could put it on any of the other 12 notes. Okay, so that's where the 12 comes back into play a little bit. So many different options, but it's always going to sound the same. It's always going to sound as though it's in a major mode. It's just starting from a different place. And so we start with C major because it's all of the white keys, and because that's so easy to visualize and so easy to play, and it's something that we've all heard a million times before. Should bring back some fond memories for you. So why do I recommend that you work in C major? I mainly recommend it because it's very easy to work in the piano roll with C major. You can distinctly see all of the different white notes here as compared to black notes, so it's easy to click in on white notes. And you also have a basis for working with C here. So they give you the C's right there along the side, and that's really helpful because we can't really zoom this in too much from a vertical perspective. And since we can't really zoom it in there, how do we always get a sense of like where we're starting? It's a great sort of balancing point. And so I think working in C major is quite helpful. And there's a great myth that's sort of like, oh man, C major, wow, that's like super corny and way overused and you can't do anything original with it. That's completely false, because with an equal tempered tuning system, the truth is C major, from purely like the science, sounds exactly the same as D major or E major or F major, because you have all of the same ratio relationships no matter where you start or where you finish. It's always going to be the same in an equal tempered system. In the past, in early days in Bach's day, before we had sort of that perfect equal tempered system in place, each of the keys would probably sound drastically different because they didn't have those perfect relationships. Now, with electronic music, and even with music that you're composing, the reason why you may not choose C major, you might choose something else, has to do with instrument ranges. So with like electronic music, for example, you want to make sure that if you have subs, that your root key, where you're starting, that name that it's given, C major, you want to make sure that that low C that you're going to play is audible, is something that you can hear, that somebody else can hear. There's certain sub frequencies that go too low, and then there's certain sub frequencies that are, too high, and they start not being sub frequencies anymore, and they don't get that whole, shaking sensation that you love from the sub frequencies. And so with classical music as well, not every instrument can play every single note. So if you know that there's like, for example, a solo that's going to be for the piccolo, you're going to choose a key that works really well for the piccolo or for the French horn or for the bassoon. You're going to have to make all of those choices and all of those decisions. So in the computer, though, where we can kind of play anything anywhere, if you're working in C major as compared to like D major, it's not going to make the biggest difference in the world. And that's why I would recommend you work in something like C major. All right, so we got that rant out of the way. Let's go to the very final example here, and that's talking about harmony and talking about triads. Ugh, really boring stuff, I know, but also very important. So a triad is just taking any key within the scale. That wasn't the right way of saying that, but you get the idea. So if we have our C, okay, to build a triad on C, we're going to take the first, the third, and the fifth based off of the C major. So the first in C major is C, and then the third is the E, and the fifth is the G, which this is not on a G, I don't think. That's on an A, is the G. All right, C, E, G. And you can see that the relationship is as such. We go up 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we go up 1, 2, 3. But when you're actually building your triads, you're not just going to always use the same pattern. It's actually more important, or I should say it's essential, to keep everything locked to the key itself. So when we go up to the F, which is very popular to use in conjunction with C, why is it popular in conjunction with C? Because, oh, look, there's actually a C in the F triad. We go to the F and we go F, A, B, the third of the F, and then we go up to the fifth, which is the C. So F, G, A, B, C, number 5, like so. And then we have the G here, and you can see that that has a relationship as well. Now, all of these actually follow those same rules. So we go up 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we go up 1, 2, 3. But if we were to start on, say, the D, it would be a little bit different, because now what's happened is we've actually hit a black note here, which we can't do. So the third of the D in C major is going to be, let's see, D, A, B, C, D, E, F. So it's going to be an F. And then we're also going to have the fifth. So A, B, C, D, E, D, E, F, G, A. And that one is already sitting on the A, but you can now see that that relationship has changed to a +3 and a +4 as compared to that +4, +3 that we see with the F and that we see with the G. So we can take a listen to this really quick and see what it sounds like. Something you've heard many times, and actually after hearing that last little G there, you really want to go back to the C. And this is just, again, one of these things that's ingrained in you as somebody who's grown up listening to a lot of Western music. And normally you're going to end a progression, or you're going to end a song with the fifth. Come on, buddy. The fifth going to the first. Like so. Okay, but we can make it more interesting than that. We can actually make it more definitive if we want by going in here and actually putting those notes in a little bit of a different order. So this is the C here, the C, E, and the G. And then we have the F, which is the F, the A, and the C. But I've taken this note here, which is the C, and I've actually brought it down. Okay, so I've taken it down an octave. It's still an F, an A, and a C, just in a different order. So we have the C, the F, and then we could actually build the G if we want, which is going to be G, and then we're going to have it's going to be a B, we're going to have a D, and then we're going to have a G, which is right here. So we can hear this now. We have the C, F, G, C. Really definitive there, rooting us back home. So you could try different chords here. So like we could just like randomly choose something. Who knows what it's going to be? Let's add something else in just for fun. And you'll notice that that sort of pull back to the C isn't going to be as strong. And the truth is, you can experiment with this, and that's what I want you to also take away is, from like a technical standpoint, that doesn't sound right. But to my ear, it also sounds quite interesting, and I wouldn't have any problem listening to a song that ended in that kind of a fashion. You know what I mean? And just to further solidify this whole idea that C major isn't like a super corny key that you can't use, just listen to what I was able to come up with here using the strings and just kind of experimenting. You know, I do know what's going on here from a theory perspective, but you could have also come to the same conclusion and made this by just fiddling around with different notes. So here's like a little string part I've come up with. So I also went in there and took some of the things we learned before. I added, you know, reverb, phaser, a little bit of EQ. Now, this is in C major. but it doesn't sound that corny to me. It actually sounds really beautiful. It sounds quite interesting. So realize that it's not so much, choosing C major versus D major as much as it is determining how you're going to use the notes within any given key or within any given scale. So my recommendation is, if you've never made a song before, work in C major and just experiment. Drop different notes on here and just make sure that they're all white keys. Focus a lot with the C's, right? Make sure you're kind of starting in C and ending with some C's. And if you do that, it should sound like a perfectly acceptable track. And you'll find that just by clicking around and using your ear, you're actually going to be coming to a lot of music theory conclusions, whether you know it or not.